In 1933, Germany stood at a crossroads. Its economy was broken, its people were desperate, and its government was weak. Yet within only a few years, one man would transform Germany into one of the most powerful nations on earth. His name was Adolf Hitler. To millions, he appeared unstoppable. To many, he seemed like a political genius. But more than 400 years before Hitler was born, an Italian thinker had already written about how ambitious men rise to power. His name was Niccolò Machiavelli, and his most famous book would become one of the most controversial political works ever written. The Prince, a book feared by some, admired by others, and studied by leaders for centuries. But what if many of the methods that helped Hitler rise had already been described inside its pages? Tonight we explore one of the most fascinating questions in modern history. Did Machiavelli explain Hitler's rise long before World War II began? To understand the answer, we must travel back to Renaissance Italy, a land divided by rival cities, political conspiracies, betrayals, and constant struggles for power. Machiavelli witnessed governments rise and collapse. He watched powerful men seize control and lose everything. From those observations, he wrote a book unlike any other. Unlike philosophers who described how leaders should behave, Machiavelli focused on something different: how leaders actually gain power, how they keep it, and how they survive in a dangerous world. His world was brutal. Kingdoms fell overnight. Alliances changed constantly. Friends became enemies. Rulers who appeared strong often vanished within months. Machiavelli believed survival depended on understanding reality, not fantasy. Perhaps no lesson from The Prince became more famous than this: it is safer to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. Centuries later, this idea would appear in one of history's most dangerous political movements. After World War I, Germany faced humiliation. Economic collapse destroyed savings. Families lost everything. Millions struggled to find work. Political violence spread across cities. Confidence in democracy weakened. Every year, more people searched desperately for answers. And whenever societies face uncertainty, powerful figures often emerge promising stability. Hitler understood this better than almost anyone. He recognized that fear could unite people faster than hope. Fear of unemployment, fear of economic collapse, fear of political enemies, fear of national decline. As fear grew, support for radical solutions grew as well. Machiavelli understood that successful leaders rarely create emotions from nothing, and instead, they identify emotions already present within society and amplify them. Hitler did exactly that. Through speeches, rallies, symbols, and propaganda, he transformed existing frustrations into political energy. Millions of Germans began believing he represented strength, certainty, and national revival. But Machiavelli wrote about another principle equally important: appearance. A ruler must appear strong, confident, decisive, and capable even when circumstances remain uncertain. Hitler mastered political theater. Massive rallies filled with flags, disciplined formations, dramatic lighting, and powerful speeches created an image of unity and strength. To supporters, it appeared inspirational. To opponents, it appeared intimidating. But to everyone watching, it projected power. And power often becomes reality when enough people believe in it. As the Nazi movement expanded, Hitler continued building his image as Germany's future. He presented himself as the leader capable of restoring order, rebuilding the economy, and reversing the humiliation of World War I. Many Germans did not support every aspect of his ideology, but they supported stability, they supported recovery, they supported change. Machiavelli understood something timeless. People often tolerate extraordinary measures when they believe those measures will restore security. In 1933, Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. What followed would change history forever. Once in power, he moved quickly. Political opponents were removed. Institutions fell under Nazi influence. Independent organizations disappeared. Authority became increasingly centralized. Machiavelli wrote that rulers who hesitate often lose power, while rulers who act decisively strengthen their position. Again, the similarities become difficult to ignore. Within only a few years, Germany looked completely different. Unemployment declined, massive infrastructure projects appeared, military strength expanded, confidence returned for many citizens. To supporters, Hitler seemed unstoppable. To the outside world, Germany appeared transformed. Yet Machiavelli also warned readers about a dangerous illusion. Success creates confidence, confidence creates arrogance, and arrogance often destroys leaders who begin believing they have become invincible. This warning would become critically important, because while Hitler continued consolidating power, another lesson from the prince was quietly unfolding. Machiavelli believed leaders must understand fortune, not luck in the modern sense, but the unpredictable forces that shape history. Economic conditions, wars, alliances, crises, opportunities. Great leaders recognize these forces and adapt to them. Weak leaders believe they control everything. By the late 1930s, Hitler had achieved remarkable successes. Germany reoccupied territories, rebuilt its military, and expanded influence across Europe. Each success strengthened his confidence. Each victory reinforced the belief that his instincts were always correct, and that belief would eventually become one of his greatest weaknesses. But before disaster arrived, Germany continued rising. Military parades filled the streets, new factories appeared across the country, industrial production accelerated. The armed forces expanded rapidly. To millions of Germans, the future seemed brighter than it had in decades. And this is where Machiavelli becomes fascinating, because the prince is not merely a guide for gaining power, it is also a warning about what happens when leaders stop listening, when they surround themselves with loyal followers instead of honest advisors, when they confuse fear with respect, when they believe success can never end. As Germany moved closer toward war, many of these warning signs began appearing. Military commanders increasingly hesitated to challenge Hitler's decisions. Government institutions became dependent upon one central figure. Strategic discussions narrowed as dissent became dangerous. Machiavelli repeatedly emphasized the importance of wise advisors. A ruler who hears only praise eventually loses contact with reality, and reality has a way of returning when least expected. By 1939, Europe stood on the edge of catastrophe. Germany had grown stronger, more confident, and more ambitious than ever before. The world watched nervously. Some feared war. Others believed conflict could still be avoided, but events were already moving toward a collision that would engulf continents. And as Hitler prepared for what would become World War II, many of the ideas described centuries earlier in The Prince had already appeared. The use of fear, the power of perception, the importance of decisive action, the consolidation of authority, and the dangerous temptation of believing power will last forever. But Machiavelli's story was not finished, because the same book that seemed to explain Hitler's rise would also help explain his downfall. And that downfall would begin when success transformed into overconfidence, and overconfidence transformed into catastrophe. By the late 1930s, Europe was becoming increasingly unstable. Germany had expanded its military capabilities, challenged international agreements, and increased its influence across the continent. Yet each successful gamble encouraged further risks. To Hitler, the evidence appeared overwhelming. His opponents seemed weak, his critics seemed wrong, his movement appeared unstoppable. But Machiavelli understood something many powerful leaders forget. Fortune changes, conditions change, circumstances change, and strategies that succeed during one period may fail completely during another. As Germany continued expanding its influence, the rest of Europe faced difficult decisions. Some leaders hoped compromise would preserve peace. Others feared that every concession simply encouraged greater aggression. Year after year, the tension grew. Then came one of the defining moments in modern history. In September 1939, German forces crossed into Poland. Within days, Europe was at war. What had once been political maneuvering became military conflict. What had once been speeches and negotiations became tanks, aircraft, and armies. Early victories came quickly. Poland fell, then Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, France. One after another, European nations collapsed before the speed and coordination of German military operations. To much of the world, Hitler now appeared unstoppable. Newspapers described astonishing victories. Military experts struggled to explain Germany's success. Entire governments fell in a matter of weeks. For supporters, these victories seemed to confirm Hitler's genius. For critics, they raised an uncomfortable question. What if he could not be stopped? Machiavelli understood that success can be the most dangerous moment in a leader's career because success creates illusions. It convinces rulers that fortune will always remain on their side. It encourages them to take larger risks. It tempts them to believe their instincts are infallible. By 1940, Germany stood at the height of its power. Much of Europe lay under Nazi control. The British Empire stood isolated. American involvement remained uncertain, and Hitler's confidence had never been greater. Yet hidden beneath the victories were problems that would eventually become impossible to ignore. Germany's economy depended increasingly on conquest. Supply lines stretched farther across Europe. Military resources faced growing pressure, and while Germany celebrated victories, powerful nations beyond Europe were preparing for a much longer struggle. Machiavelli wrote that wise rulers prepare for difficulties before they arrive. They strengthen institutions during times of success. They anticipate future challenges. They recognize that every victory contains the seeds of future problems. But leaders who become intoxicated by success often ignore warning signs. They begin believing that past victories guarantee future triumphs. And according to many historians, this is exactly where Hitler's rise began transforming into the first stage of his eventual downfall. The same principles that helped him acquire power were now encouraging decisions that would place Germany on a path toward one of the greatest catastrophes in modern history. And as World War II expanded across continents, Machiavelli's warnings would become more relevant than ever before. As the war expanded across Europe, the very qualities that had helped Hitler rise to power began transforming into dangerous weaknesses. For years, his confidence had been rewarded with success. Political opponents had been defeated. Foreign governments had hesitated. Military campaigns had achieved astonishing victories. Each triumph reinforced a belief that his instincts were superior to everyone else's. Yet Machiavelli repeatedly warned that successful leaders often become victims of their own achievements. The more victories they accumulate, the more difficult it becomes to recognize mistakes. Confidence slowly becomes certainty. Certainty becomes arrogance, and arrogance blinds rulers to reality. By 1941, Germany controlled much of Europe and stood at the height of its power. To many observers, it appeared that no force on earth could stop the Nazi war machine. But history often changes direction precisely when victory seems inevitable. One of the most important lessons found in The Prince is that rulers must understand their limitations. Ambition can create greatness, but unchecked ambition can also create disaster. Machiavelli believed that wise leaders choose their battles carefully. They understand resources. They understand geography. They understand the risks hidden behind apparent opportunities. Yet in June of 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. It became the largest military operation in human history. Millions of soldiers crossed vast frontiers as German commanders expected another rapid victory. Early successes appeared to confirm those expectations. Entire Soviet armies were surrounded. Cities fell. Territory was captured at an extraordinary pace. Once again, Hitler appeared unstoppable. But reality began asserting itself. Supply lines stretched across enormous distances. Fuel shortages emerged. Roads turned into mud. Winter arrived with brutal force. Soviet resistance intensified. The quick victory that German planners expected slowly transformed into a prolonged struggle. Machiavelli understood that fortune favors leaders who adapt, but punishes those who refuse to recognize changing conditions. Hitler increasingly ignored warnings from experienced commanders. Strategic decisions became concentrated around one man. Alternative viewpoints became less welcome. Honest criticism became more dangerous. The same centralized power that had once strengthened Germany now limited its ability to respond effectively to new challenges. Meanwhile, another power was rising across the Atlantic. The United States possessed something Germany could never fully match: industrial capacity on a massive scale. American factories operated day and night, producing tanks, aircraft, ships, ammunition, vehicles, and supplies. Entire cities transformed into engines of production. Millions of workers contributed to a war effort unlike anything the world had ever seen. Machiavelli wrote that successful rulers must prepare for future dangers before they arrive. In many ways, America demonstrated this principle perfectly. Industrial strength, economic resilience, and strategic planning created advantages that would become increasingly decisive as the war continued. By 1943, the momentum of the conflict had begun shifting. German forces were retreating in the east. Allied bombing campaigns intensified. Resources became more difficult to replace. Fuel shortages crippled military operations. Experienced soldiers were lost faster than they could be replaced. Yet, despite growing evidence that conditions were deteriorating, Hitler remained convinced that victory remained possible. This is another warning Machiavelli emphasized repeatedly. Leaders who become isolated from reality often continue making decisions based on what they wish were true rather than what is actually happening. The gap between perception and reality grows larger till it becomes impossible to ignore. As Allied armies prepared for the invasion of Western Europe, another lesson from the Prince emerged. Machiavelli believed that deception is an essential part of political and military strategy. Successful leaders understand that influencing what opponents believe can be just as important as physical strength. Before D-Day, Allied planners launched one of the greatest deception operations in history. Fake armies, fake tanks, false radio transmissions, and carefully planted intelligence convinced German leaders that the invasion would occur somewhere other than Normandy. Valuable divisions remained in the wrong locations, while Allied forces established a foothold in France. Once again, strategy, perception, and information proved capable of shaping history. By 1944, Germany faced enemies advancing from multiple directions. Soviet forces pushed westward, Allied armies advanced from France, bombing raids targeted industrial centers, resources disappeared, infrastructure collapsed. Confidence that once seemed unshakable slowly gave way to desperation. Machiavelli warned that rulers who fail to adapt eventually become trapped by circumstances they no longer control. The decisions that once created strength become obstacles to survival. The strategies that once delivered victories become liabilities. This pattern was now unfolding across the Third Reich. As the war entered its final phase, the contrast between Machiavelli's advice and Hitler's actions became increasingly clear. Machiavelli admired flexibility. Hitler became rigid. Machiavelli valued practical reality. Hitler increasingly relied on optimism, disconnected from battlefield conditions. Machiavelli believed leaders must surround themselves with capable advisors willing to speak honestly. Hitler increasingly trusted only those who reinforced his existing beliefs. These differences mattered because wars are ultimately contests of adaptation. The side that learns faster often survives. The side that refuses to adjust eventually falls behind. By early 1945, Germany was collapsing. Cities lay in ruins, transportation networks failed, industrial production plummeted, Allied armies advanced toward Berlin from every direction. What had once appeared to be an unstoppable empire now faced complete destruction. Millions of civilians fled westward. Soldiers fought defensive battles with diminishing resources. The war that had begun with astonishing victories ended in catastrophe. On April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler died in Berlin as Soviet forces closed around the city. Days later, Nazi Germany surrendered. The most destructive war in European history had finally come to an end. Looking back, the parallels between the Prince and the rise and fall of Nazi Germany remain remarkable. Machiavelli did not predict Hitler. He did not foresee World War II. Yet he understood something timeless about power and human nature. He understood how fear can be used to unite people. He understood how perception shapes political reality. He understood how ambitious leaders consolidate authority. Most importantly, he understood that the very strengths that help leaders rise can ultimately contribute to their downfall. Confidence can become arrogance. Authority can become isolation. Success can become complacency. And power, no matter how overwhelming it appears, is never permanent. More than 500 years after it was written, The Prince continues to be studied in military academies, universities, governments, and boardrooms around the world, not because it teaches morality, but because it reveals uncomfortable truths about leadership, ambition, influence, and power. The story of Nazi Germany demonstrates those lessons on one of the largest stages in human history. It reminds us that understanding power is not the same as admiring it. It reminds us that strategy without wisdom can lead to catastrophe. And it reminds us that history often repeats the same patterns even when the names, places, and circumstances change. The rise and fall of Adolf Hitler remains one of the most important stories of the 20th century. And hidden within that story are echoes of ideas first written in Renaissance Italy centuries earlier. That is why the prince remains relevant today, because while technology changes, while nations rise and fall, and while wars reshape the world, human nature remains remarkably consistent, and few writers understood that truth better than Niccolò Machiavelli.